Good evening. We'll start off with some Tehillim and Tzedakah, and then we'll start the shiur. Particularly, I want to point out we have the Shliach in Dublin, Reb Zalman Lent, who's in hospital due to COVID, and wish him a refuah shlema. So his name is Zalman Shimon Halevi ben Chana Rivka. So refuah shlema kroiva, Pesach Shorchel Yisrael. Du Kapitel Chof and Kuf Nun. Nam Natseach Mizbel David, Ya'an Kaddish V'Yem Torah, Yisagev Chashem Elahei Yaakov, Yishlach Ezracha MiKodesh, Umitzion Yisadecha, Yizkei Kol Mipesecha, V'Eloscha Yidash Nesela, Yiton L'choch L'vavecha, V'chol Asasecha Yimale, Nerananda V'Shosecha, V'Shem Eloheinu Nidgel Yimale Adonai Kol Mishalesecha. Ati Yodati Ki Yeshi Adonai Mashiach Ya'anehu Mishmei Kodshay Yigvures Yeshi Yeminoi Eila Varechev Ve'ela Vasusim V'anachnu B'Shem Adonai Eloheinu Nazkir Hei Makoru V'Nafolu V'anachnu Kamnu V'Nis Eidod Adonai Yeshua HaMelech Yaneinu V'Yem Koreinu. Hallelujah, Hallelujah, El V'Kodshay, Hallelujah B'Kei Uzei, Hallelujah B'Greso, Hallelujah Kreb Gudlei, Hallelujah B'Tek HaShefa, Hallelujah B'Nevel V'Chiner, Hallelujah B'Sefer Mochel, Hallelujah B'Minin V'Ugam. Hallelujah b'tzil tzilei shama, hallelujah b'tzil tzilei sruah, keil hanashama, hallelujah, hallelujah. Also, I'd like to mention that tonight is Rabbi Sudak's yahrzeit, so the Tehillah Ili Nishmasei. Right, so now let's start the shiur. So, someone asked me this question about Neshama Yasera. So, we know that it's mentioned in Gemara, there's idea that on Shabbos, a person has an extra neshama yaser, an extra spirit, an extra soul. And this is explained in Halocho and explained in Kabbalah. The practical question is that there is a custom that when it comes on Friday night by Ofroi Solenu, to rise, to stand up, as if to greet the Neshama Yasera. And the person was asking, what about Yomtov? Does this apply to Yomtov? So let's first look at what is this Neshama Yasera. So there's two angles. One is on Pi Nigla and one is more in Kabbalah, in Derech HaSoid. And in Lekut HaSichos Chelik Lamed Aleph, Parshas Kisi, so the Rebbe discusses this at length. He's more discussing the halacha side. And basically it means that on Shabbos a person is more relaxed because there's no pressure. And therefore, that's the Neshama Yaser. It's a sense of relaxation, tranquility. Yomtov, because you're allowed to cook on Yomtov, therefore there's a Tosfos which says, and the Alter Rebbe brings it, a Neshama Yaser klal. There is no Neshama Yaser. Whereas the Rashbam says that there is a bit of a Neshama Yasera, and this is to explain why when Motzei Shabbos goes into Yomtov, about having besomim. So normally we have Motzei Shabbos, we use the besomim, and the explanation is because you're leaving the delight, the relaxation, the tranquility of Shabbos, and so there's a certain, shall we say, grieving. And the besomim is meant to kind of give you a boost at that moment. When Yom Tov is on Sunday, so we make him havdolah, yaknehaz. So we don't include besomim. Why not? Why don't we? When Yom Tov is on a Motzei Shabbos, why don't we use besomim? So here we have two approaches. We have the approach of the Rashbam, who says, instead of besomim, you've got a whole Yom Tov meal. Why do you need to have besomim? You've got something much more than that. You've got the Yom Tov. Tosfos says, no, that and Tosfos says that there is no Neshama Yasera on Yom Tov, etc. Okay, so here we have that's Al Pi Nigla. The Neshama Yasera is a sense of tranquility. Al Pi Kabbalah, obviously there is an extra neshama. That's very clear in the Zohar, etc. And as we are familiar, the neshama comes in there's various levels of the neshama: nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, yechida. And the way it's explained in Kabbalah is that Friday night, when the Kabbalah Shabbos is the greeting of the nefesh, and then at Borchu, before Shema, is the greeting of the ruach, and then at Ofroi Soleinu Sukkos Shlemecha, that's the greeting of the neshama, and this is all on the Tzad Hanukva. And then Shabbos by day, again, there's Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, and one of the stations of the Neshama Yesera is Nishmas Kochai. So again, it's welcoming another aspect of the Neshama. Fine. And now the question is, what about Yomtov? So in Kabbalah, in the Zohar, it says there's a Neshama Yesera on Yomtov, even on Rosh Chodesh. Fine. What we have in front of us is we have three Sfarim here. One is a sefer called, they're all Sephardic Sfarim. The Sephardim are much more into Kabbalah than the Ashkenazim, especially translating Kabbalah into what you have to do now, what you shouldn't be doing now, etc. So this is the source. This is the Sefer Shalmei Chagiga, and this is quoted on the margin of the Shulchan Aruch and the Sharet Shuvah. He quotes this from this sefer, but I got the original sefer. On Friday night, when you say Ofroi Sukkos Shalom, Kosav V'mara Rav Chaim Vital, Shetzorach Lokum Lekabel Toisvis Neshama Yesero Mibchinas Halaylo. That one should arise to greet the extra neshama of the nighttime part of the neshama. As I said, there's daytime and night. V'chein mashma b'sidur maharisruk zal. Oma hamagia v'chein kosav b'sefer chemdos yomim perik vov v'shekein mashma b'zoyha b'reishis ayin shom. So, all right, he's telling us this is where it comes. This meaning of rising when saying Ofroi Soleinu Sukkos Shlemecha. So that's about Shabbos. What about Yomtov? So here we have beneath is from a sefer called Beis HaShoeva. It's a Sephardic sefer. The Mechaber's name is Ashkenazi. So that's, in England, you don't call it Englisher when you're in England. When you're in a different country, you call it Englisher. So he was perhaps of Ashkenazi origin, but it's a Sephardi. He's put together various Sidurim, etc. Beis Menucha, Beis Oived. So this is called Beis HaShoeva. And he writes the following. I've seen some people that they rise when the Chazan starts Kaddish by Ma'ariv for Yomtov, like they would on a Friday night. But according to what's written in the Siddur of Marisruk, of Yisrael Sruk, for that Friday night, you rise because of the greeting, the level of Ruach of the Neshama Yisera. By Yom Tov, there's no Tosefes or Ruach, the Kabbalah, there's nothing to greet. Because he's following like Tosefes, there is no Nefesh, there's no Neshama Yisera on Yom Tov, therefore you don't have to rise. And therefore, that's where he takes this approach, that there is no Neshama Yisera on Yom Tov, and there's no need to rise at the particular points where you would rise on Shabbos. Now, the third source which you have is the Kaf HaChaim, who was relatively recent, and it's been typeset. As you can see, it's a nicer type than the old one. And so now he writes, the Chaim Vital writes in his Siddur that one should rise at Kaddish, at Borchu of Ma'ariv, because that's when you greet the Ruach. And by Ofroi Soleinu, that's when you should rise because of the Kabbalah and Neshama of Shabbos. And he quotes that Shalmei Tzibur, which we just read. And he quotes Reb Chaim Falaji, who was in Turkey, the Fizeh, Ba'amiras Tevas Nishmas Kochai, which you say Shabbos morning, you should stand because that's when you're greeting the Neshama of the Nefesh of Bechinas HaYom. And Kess has also got to do with it. You're seeing here different sources in Kabbalah, which are brought to Halocho about rising at this point. Now, what's happened here is that they're taking a position on this Beis HaShoeva that on Yom Tov there is no Kabbalah, there's no Neshama Yisera, And then I saw another sefer which says that Yomtov, there is a neshama yesera, but it doesn't come in. It's not greeted by stages in tefillah. I'm not convinced. And you know what? Either I get up because I get up every on Yom Tov because I'm so used to it as I do on Shabbos, and I'm not convinced that there isn't it's mamish the same tefillahs. Perhaps there is the neshama yeseda of Yom Tov is also greeted at those stages in davening. I'm not an esek v'nisaris, so all right. Let's go on to the next question, a much more down to earth question, and that is about a teacher asked me this question. She's teaching Halocho, and what's the story about packages arriving on Shabbos? So I thought her question was of tchum, that the package which arrived on Shabbos, Amazon or whatever, it may have arrived from beyond the tchum. So here's an interesting point. I'm sure a lot of you know one of my pet stories is about the fellow who his luggage didn't arrive on time on Erev Yomtov, and it was going to be brought by the airline to the house on Yomtov. And I had a whole parsha about being chutz l'tchum. But when post is delivered, so the issue of tchum is not a problem. The reason being that imagine if there's a shop which get a delivery for their own people. Is a Yid allowed to have benefit from the fact that a goy brought for his goyish customers? He brought from chutz l'tchum, so a Yid is allowed to benefit from it, so long as it's not roiv, whatever Yidden, roiv customers are Yidden. So the fact that a goy brought from chutz l'tchum is okay because he brought it for the goyim, and we're allowed to have benefit. On that basis, contemporary poskim. Now here, this is from Shmiras Shabbos Hilchos. He quotes recent poskim. They're saying the postal service, when they deliver from chutz l'tchum into the tchum, they're not doing it because of the recipient. They're doing it because it was sent, etc. And then they're delivering many other packages, so they don't see it as being huva b'shviloi michutz l'tchum. They see it as being brought for Rov Goyim, and therefore you're allowed to have benefit from it. So let's read this quote from Shmiras Shabbos Hilchos. A package which is brought from chutz la'aretz, because there's no delivery of posts in it. So I guess if a package is delivered in chutz la'aretz by the post on Shabbos, and not because the sender had insisted that it should have to be delivered on Shabbos, so then you are allowed to benefit from the contents, even if it was brought from chutz l'tchum, or you know what about chutz l'tchum? What about it was brought from Rosh Hashanah, etc.? It's not a worry. Even the Rosh Hashanah Gemara. In the Sefer, one of the Sforim which talks about this, he says, I think it's one of the Sforim, he says, you're asking about the chutz l'tchum, and what about the train and the engine, which they're stoking the steam engines? He says, don't worry, because it wasn't done for you. So, all right, so I responded to this teacher that a package which comes from chutz l'tchum by the post, you are allowed to benefit from it. So then it turns out her question wasn't that. Her question was about opening the package. Are you allowed to use the contents? Well, you have to open the package. Are you allowed to? So before going into the whole pilpul, I just want to say a dover haposhut, which I wrote back to her also. We all were brought up that a package arrives on Shabbos, you wait till Motzei Shabbos. Why? Nasa v'nishma. But meanwhile, that is the general position. So this is a quote. The first quote is from the Alter Rebbe in Siman Shein Zayin. So he gives you a story. A guy brought a sealed package, sealed letter, and the Yid can't open it. He's allowed to tell the guy, I can't read this letter so long as it's sealed. And the guy will open it on his own accord. And he says, why is that okay? Because the goy, look in the brackets, the Alter Rebbe says, the goy thinks that part of his mission of delivering the letter is to open the letter also. Without going into discussion about the Amiri L'Nochri side, but what we are seeing is that there is a problem of a Yid opening a letter. what's the problem? Is it because of tearing a seal? Is it because of tearing letters? It's not so clear. Let's now. And then the next quote is from a sefer called Ksasa Shulchan, and it's quite straightforward. He says you're not allowed to open a sealed letter, but you are allowed to tell a goy, I can't read it so long as it's sealed, and the goy is allowed to open it for you. So we're seeing here that certainly to open, let's say the question was something like a Kfar Chabad magazine arrives and it's got a shrink, it's got a plastic envelope, a plastic seal. Are you allowed to open those things? And so the position is no, that you're not allowed to. What's the difference between that and opening a package of food? I actually just picked up a new volume of Rabbi Farkash's Shabbos Halocho, Rabbi Kasil Farkash, and in this volume he actually talks about opening containers. It's as part of the way he's on for, and he's just kind of questions: what's the Tzorech HaShabbos? How is it really a Tzorech HaShabbos that you should read that magazine? That's his basis why you shouldn't be opening. So bottom line is that whilst we do open packages of food, and sometimes we'll even open it at a seal, and we'll rely on that the seal was, the adhesion was for temporary nature. So we'll rely on that for opening packages, but we won't rely on that for opening reading material because it's not defined as Tzorech HaShabbos. If you want to read it further, as I say, Shabbos Halocho, he has a few pages discussion, but that seems to be the general position. Right. Whereas on Yomtov, actually, it's more lenient. Yomtov one would be allowed to open a similar kind of package. All right, let's go on. Okay, so here is a shiur which I got from a shliach somewhere in Eastern Europe. And they are building a community center, which I understand would include a shul. And the city have given them a permit, but they have to finish by a certain date, and it's taking longer than the original plan. And so they're now quite pressed for time. The company, who are the building company, are contractors. They are saying it's taking too long and we have to finish on time. And they're working on Shabbos. So they're not asking. Originally, the agreement was the contract that they shouldn't be working on Shabbos, but they're working on Shabbos, and he's asking how much does he have to put his foot down to stop them from doing so. It's a question of costs, etc. So now let's put down a principle here. There's a difference in halacha between a sochir and a kabbalan. A sochir means you're paying the person for their time. A kabbalan is you're paying them for the job to be done, and they can do it in whichever time they choose. That's not your worry. And so we all know that you can give your car into a mechanic on Friday and you'll pick it up on Monday. The fact that he's going to be hacking away at your car on Shabbos morning, you don't worry. You're not paying him for the time. You're paying him for the service, which is going to take so much time. But when he does it, it's his choice. The thing is that heter, let's say you give your clothes to a dry cleaners and you pick it up a day later, you don't worry because you're paying for the job. That only works on mobile objects. B'mechubel karka, in other words, in property, in real estate, if it's within a Tchum Yisrael, where another Yid would pass by and see there's work going on, so it's osur to have work done on your premises. We all know that, and the reason is because of Marasai, and people will see there's a development being worked on Shabbos, and they might suspect that the workers were paid by time rather than as a contract for the job. So I really, when he asked me this question, I felt very sorry for him. I thought there's no way to be matir. But then looking at Shulchan Aruch, so let's read the following. This is in Siman Reish Mem Dal, the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, There are places that the kohol, that the community hire goyish workers. They pay them for the job, not for the time, and their job is to take away the garbage from the street. And the goy does it. He sometimes works on Shabbos also. What's the issue of clearing garbage? I'm not sure even. Is it because of books? I'm not sure. And so at any rate, there you have a guy who's doing work for you on Shabbos. And some say it's okay because it's well known that this kind of job is not paid by the hour, it's paid for the job. And therefore it's not a problem. There's no marasai. So now we go down to the second paragraph. So now we go to the second paragraph. For this reason, we can allow also a goy to build a shul on Shabbos if it's in a place where it's well known that houses are built by workers who are paid for the job, not for day workers. It's not like, I don't know, like a gardener, perhaps you're paying per hour, but I apologize to any gardeners who I've insulted just now. But if it's a person who's paid for a skilled job, usually you pay them for the job, certainly in the way of the contractor. Some places you have adrichal, who's like the overall manager, and he's got day workers. There is a problem of arsayin. But if it's normal for the work to be done by the contractors for the job, then one could allow this. One could ignore the fact it's being done on Shabbos if it's a Beis HaKnesses. And he continues that should only be allowed b'shas adchak. There's a concern that if it's not done in time, the whole project may be halted. Shloi b'shas adchak, very important point here. If it's not a shas adchak, so then one shouldn't allow such a thing because of Achil Hashem, because the goyim won't allow a church to be built on Sundays. And we're allowing our place of worship to be built on our holy day, so it doesn't look right. So Shaloi b'shas adchak, definitely we make, and that's why the agreement was originally not to work on Shabbos. But I think the way he's described it is a shas adchak, and it is a contract kind of job. And on that basis, one can just ignore and let them continue their work. I'm going to look at the chats, a couple of points which you just raised here. Why is opening the envelope with Kfar Chabad permitted on Yomtov? Okay, that's got to do with binyan b'kelim. The bag is a keli, and so on Shabbos we take a stricter view of yesh binyan b'kelim. For Yomtov, we take a more lenient view. If you want, as I say, you can look it up in the Shabbos Halocho if you can get a hold of it. Okay. Right. Let's move on. Okay. So I got this question here earlier in the week of two Chosn and Kala, and turns out the Chosn's mother's name is Yehudis, and the Kala's mother's name is Yehudis. So you got Yehudis and Yehudis who are mechatenistas. Is there an issue? So we have here, you have in the top of the page, Shavuos Rabbi Yehuda Chosid. I'm not sure exactly when, but Yehuda Chosid was in the time of the Rishonim, perhaps someone of Bali HaTosfos, and we have two Sforim of his, as far as I know. We have the Sefer Chasidim, and then we have separately Shavuos Rabbi Yehuda Chosid. And there's a lot of speculation. Perhaps Shavuos Rabbi Yehuda Chosid was written just for his offspring, not for everyone, but a lot of things we do follow Rabbi Shavuos Rabbi Yehuda Chosid. So this is reading from Shavuos Rabbi Yehuda Chosid, Shnei Bnei Adam, two people, who have the same name, Lo Yizdavgu Yachad B'Yilideyim. They shouldn't make a shidduch between their children. As far as Chelo Yasu Nisun Shnei Yilideyim Yachad, it's probably the same thing. V'zeh Sofik Oy L'Zarei L'Chol Adam. In the report here, the record, it's already a sofik whether it's only for the offspring of Rabbi Yehuda HaChosid or for all people. And then there's added in a bracket that I think it does apply to everyone, and one should be careful. So we have here a source of avoiding, of being concerned about a shidduch where both mechotenistas have the same as mechotonim have the same name. Mechotonim, what about mechotenistas? It's the same thing. So here we have a letter of the Rebbe, and it's cut out from a longer letter. And he says about a man who says he's met with a girl, and they had agreed to make a chasna, and then it was cancelled, etc. And the Rebbe, in the middle of the letter, recognizes the fact that the two mothers have the same name, and there's an older sister of the Kala who was or wasn't married in between. But Negela Poil, if the older sister has already been a shidduch, or she's moichel b'lev v'sholem, so the Rebbe writes, "Kedai lohoisif shem lemishehi me'ha'imohos." One should add another name to one of the two mothers. Ki royani b'mechtovoi sheshem eim ha'almo v'shem imoi shavahu. I see that your name and your fiance's mother's name, sorry, your mother's name and her mother's name is the same name. So the Rebbe is recommending they add a name. I recently just picked up a sefer. Show you, just got it just last week. A sefer Agura Halocho. This is from Reb Mordechai Farkash, the son of Reb Kosil Farkash. He's a shliach in Belgium, in Washington State, Seattle, and in one of his articles there, in one of his shuvas, he writes about this because it's not such a well-known thing, and a lot of people don't worry about having the same name for mechotenistas. Okay, it's a sein gesund, but he does towards the end. He brings a few people who the Rebbe, one was Reitzis, where the Rebbe said that it was her name was Yehuda, his wife's name was Yehudis, and the mechotenis name, the Rebbe said to add Alta Yehudis. So the Rebbe, to several people, gave this guidance that one should add another name. There shouldn't be the two mechotenistas, or mechotonim for that matter, which was more obvious, not having identical names. If one's called Shlomo Zalman, and one's called Shlomo Chaim, that's not a problem because they're two separate names. This is obviously much less known than having daughter-in-law and mother-in-law having the same name, or chosin and father-in-law having the same name, which people are much more conscientious about. But there is this thing also. Okay. Now talking about chasanas, so now we have someone who's making a chasana just a few days after Tisha B'Av overseas, and there's traveling involved. And what about all your clothes? Can you wash clothes the day after Tisha B'Av? Now Tisha B'Av this year, since Pesach was on Sunday, so Tisha B'Av is also on a Sunday, because Atabash, the first day of Pesach, is the same as the day of Tisha B'Av. So after a whole week of 9 days of not doing laundry, there's a lot of laundry, and they want to take clean clothes with them. So what's the story? So now let's take a look here from Shulchan Aruch. This is in the dinim of Tisha B'Av and Ben HaMetzorim. So we have here Tov Kuf Nun Ches towards the end of the dinim of Tisha B'Av. It says B'Tisha B'Av le'eis erev. On Tisha B'Av towards the evening, on the 9th of Av towards the evening, Hitzisu eish b'heichol. That was when the fire was ignited, and the Nisraf, behind the Beis Hamikdash, was started at Tisha B'Av evening, late afternoon. Ad shkias hachamo b'yoyim asiri. See, it burned. The Beis Hamikdash burnt for practically 24 hours. So there is a mina kosher to, it's commended minhag to avoid, like we avoid meat and wine during the 9 days on the Sfardim Shvuah Shechal Boi. So the same thing should also be continued on the day after Tisha B'Av until the whole day, following day. Then you have a curious lashon, the Ramah, which we follow as Ashkenazim, we follow the Ramah. Now, there are those who follow this, but only, and that's the Ashkenazi minhag, that the restrictions of the 9 days will be observed until, that would be this year, would be work out a Monday, a midday. Right. So that's the first thing that we're seeing here, that there is an extending of 9 days to the day after Tisha. But it only spells here out, it only spells about Bosav Yayin. There are other restrictions about haircutting and washing clothes and bathing. Are they included or not? So Mr. Brewer, etc., does bring that it should be extended also for Marshall, actually, that the restrictions which are extended after Tisha B'Av also include bathing and washing clothes. However, I have here a quote from the late Rav Wozner, who says, "L'tzoirich, one can take the lenient view." So here's obviously a tzorich, a family traveling for a chasana. So there is a tzorich here. I know before we were a little bit circumspect what's called tzorich Shabbos, but I think we all agree that traveling with a whole family, it is a tzorich to have clean clothes. You can manage without, but you can take with dirty clothes and wash them when you get there. But it is a legitimate tzorich, and one can take the lenient view, because, as I say, the Shulchan Aruch talks about the extension of the 9 days to the 10th. He's talking about Bosav Yayin and about bathing and washing clothes. It's not so clear. So l'tzorich, one can take the lenient view. And an additional point is that because it's a chasna, and the other quote which you have here is from the Mogen Avraham, and it talks about during the 9 days, and it says that if it's a mitzvah, one would be able to do some preparations during the 9 days. And so the second and the last line, he says that although we don't make a chasana during the 9 days, obviously, but one would be able to sew new clothes in order to prepare for the chasana. So here we have two things. We have here Bechlal L'Tzoirich, especially since it's tzorich for a chasana, so there is room to be meko, to be able to do the laundry even on Motzei Tisha B'Av and certainly on the Sunday. Motzei, certainly on the even Motzei Tisha B'Av, which is Monday night, and certainly on the Monday. Right, let's go on to the next question, which we have here. Is someone who's from Beis Chabad, and they clear away, and there's talesim and then there's sidurim. Is it okay to put talesim on top of sidurim, on top of sfarim? And the answer is, we have to understand we've got terms in halacha called tashmishe kedusha and tashmishe mitzvah. Tashmishe kedusha means that they have the Hashem's name written in them. Tefillin, Mezuzos, for Torah, these are called, that's the Kedusha, it's got Hashem's name, and you got the accessories to it, may be called Tashmishe Kedusha. So Tefillin boxes would be called Tashmishe Kedusha. A talis does not have Hashem's name in it, and therefore a talis is not called Tashmishe Kedusha, it's called Tashmishe Mitzvah. And because of that, so we have here a very clear distinction between Sforim, like the Sidurim, which have Hashem's name in hundreds of times, and Talesim, which are Tashmishe Mitzvah. And so what I have here in front of you is a quote from a Sefer Ginzei HaKodesh, all about Shemes. Ein lahaniach Tashmishe Kedusha or Cheftzei Mitzvah al gabi Sifrei Kodesh. One shouldn't be putting he's talking about Tashmishe Kedusha, even to put tefillin on top of it, but certainly a Cheftzei Mitzvah, one shouldn't be putting talis on top of Sifrei Kodesh. That wouldn't be in order. I want to just add another thing. Some people like sometimes to tease a child a little bit. I'm not saying that's a good idea, but sometimes they take a tzitzit and put it in their ear, and it starts tickling the child. So you're not allowed to do that with tzitzis, because the tzitzis has got it's tashmisha mitzvah. So whilst it's still operational as a mitzvah, one wouldn't be allowed to use it for a davar shel chulin. Once the tzitzis are no longer usable, then they have no kedusha. But whilst they're still in use, you're not allowed to use them for other things. Okay. Now let's go on to our next question. Where we are. Here we are. Okay. Now this is interessante hashgacha pratis. we have a couple of minutes. This week was advertised, was published a story about a Gvir who went by the Rebbe for dollars. He's from France, and the Rebbe gave him $1, and he said an extra $1 for the school which you're building. Turns out he was building a hotel, a massive hotel in Nice, and the hotel would include a school to train people to become in the how do you call in the catering business, in the restaurant business, in the hospitality sector. And then the Rebbe said to him, the Rebbe said, you should make sure to have Mezuzos on all the doors in the hotel. He built a hotel to have Mezuzos on all the doors. He went back to France. He just told the story apparently recently. He went back to France and he continued with this project of building this massive hotel. And it did not work out very well, actually. The business seemed to fail, and he had borrowed a lot of money. A lot of people's investments were put into this project, and he looked like he was bankrupt, and his house was repossessed. His father bought his house from the banks, whatever, so that he shouldn't could be totally lost. But he was, and now he says he had to meet. There's an auditor, like a government auditor, to see that there hadn't, because with all of this money, there were already murmurs that he had embezzled money and used it for other things. So he was really very negative, very how you say, he was very pessimistic of how this would turn out. And after months, finally, this auditor comes to the hotel, and he comes into his office. And on the walls of the office, there's all these pictures of where this obviously was a very rich man at some stage, and he's met all different dignitaries. And he has even a picture of him together with the president of France. They're all on the wall. And there's also a big picture of the Rebbe. And this inspector, this auditor comes in, he's looking around, he stops, he looks at the Mezuzos, and he looks at the picture of the Rebbe. And then he's got this big sheaf of papers. And this businessman is waiting for the, for the ton of bricks. And the fellow says, I see there may have been a bit of mismanagement, but with better management, I think this project could be saved. And I'm going to recommend to the government that they pump in a bit more money into the project so that it should be viable again. He's totally shocked, and he turns to the auditor. He was very grateful. He asks him, "What made you come up with that? How did you come to that conclusion?" So he says, "I'll tell you. I'll tell you. I'm also Jewish, and my wife and I were born in Vienna, in Austria, and by the war we managed to flee, to run away from there. When we dropped anything of Yiddishkeit. But when I came here to the hotel, I saw all those mezuzahs, and I knew what they are. And I saw the picture of this holy man, and I thought, the fact that not you had just one little mezuzah, you put mezuzahs all over the hotel. I noticed that. Such a person like a religious person like you can't be an embezzler, couldn't be. And that brought me around, and then the fellow says, I think it's time that my wife and I will also start becoming more active with Yiddishkeit. So this businessman, he says how the Rebbe back then, when he recommended to put up those mezuzahs, he had foreseen how this would be hatzolah for this fellow, for himself, and also will be an avenue to bring back a couple from this Austrian Jewish couple who had gone astray, and to bring them back to Yiddishkeit. Since then he was reestablished his business and was continued to be successful. I don't know his address, in case you're asking. Meanwhile, this is our Halocho protest, because before I heard the story, I had this question on my desk. What is the story about a Jewish owned property and there's a non-Jewish occupant. And I wrote on the sheet, if you have, let's say, a suite of offices, and you have, let's say, a bookkeeper in your business, a non-Jewish bookkeeper, it's his office, dedicated office. Does that door need to have a mezuzah? Could be the same thing. I have an au pair, a live-in carer, and they have a room in my house. Does that room require a mezuzah? And I was thinking, does a Jewish owner of a hotel need to have a mezuzah on all the rooms in the hotel? So now we have a halacha towards the end of Hilchos Mezuzah that a partnership between a Yid and a Goy is exempt from Mezuzah. It's a shared door, which is shared by a Goy and a Yid. That door does not require a Mezuzah. Some say it's potter min haTorah, and some say it's potter midrabanon. So the Goy shelo yoymach shofim ho'iseli. The Goy shouldn't say that the Jew is putting these things to cast some kind of spell on me. Be that as it may, when it's a partnership between a Yid and a Goy, then that doorway does not need to have a mezuzah. Then we have, this is a quote from the Sefer Chover Sador, which you may be familiar with, from Rabbi Yaakov Beloy. Avolim ha'Yisrael bailim v'ha'yakum soicher ein apoiter. He lays down a psak, which I struggled to find, but finally I found this. If the Yid owns the property, and you've got a Goy who's just a tenant, so then that's not a reason to not have a mezuzah. I don't even think it means when you've got a property out, which is just for rent. But if you are occupying a property, and there's a Goy who's occupying part of that property, who's renting from your room, that door should have a mezuzah. And I was a bit surprised because I wonder what happens. What do all these Yidden who own hotels? What do they do? Baruch Hashem, there are Yidden who own hotels. What do they do about having mezuzahs in all those rooms unless they have a Goyish partner, which probably is quite common, and that takes off the shiur of a mezuzah. But here that's why I was excited to read this story about the Rebbe saying that he should have mezuzahs on all the doors in the hotel. Okay. Sofrim, get ready some more mezuzahs, hopefully, huh? All right, let's move on. Right. Just a couple of points left. Someone wanted to buy a house, and the seder is you put down a deposit, and normally the understanding of a deposit is that if what happens like this: the house is, let's say, $1 million, you put down 100,000. And the idea is that by this and this date, you'll come up with the other 900,000. And if you don't, then that's the pashtus that you forfeit the deposit. Whatever happens if both parties are Yidden? And he thought he was, Reuven thought he'd be able to raise the mortgage, but it came to the time to completion, he wasn't able to. So now, does he forfeit the 100,000 pounds, which is put down for a down payment for a deposit? This comes into the concept of asmachta. Asmachta means if I say that this and this happens, I'll give you so much money. I commit myself. So generally we say a commitment like that, asmachta lo kanyo, it's not koine. The issue here is that here you got a ma'aseh with dina de malchusa. In dina de malchusa, of course, the way I understand, I'm not a lawyer, but I understand that actually, if you don't complete in time, you can say goodbye to your down payment. So, but here it's between two yidden. Are they bound by dina de malchusa? Can the vendor say, according to dina de malchusa, the money stays with me? So that's a difficult one. So let's just now read here again. This is from Rav Beloy. One, he says like this: one who puts down a deposit for a purchase, and the buyer says, if I'm going to retract from the purchase, my down payment, my deposit is waived, you can keep it. and he did not complete. He backtracked. Yesh oimrim shezocha hamoiche beiroven. This is how the Mechaber says, that the moiche said, okay, he can keep it. Ma'achashu kvar beyodo. Because the deposit this is in a sense worse than asmachta. Asmachta says is, if this happens, I will pay you so much money. Here it's worse. I've already put the money in his hand. Says the Mechaber, since you said you're going to waive the money, and the money's ready in his hand, you meant it absolutely seriously. Yes, and this is the Ramos says the Ramos says no, he does have to. The vendor has to give back, because when the buyer put down that money, he wasn't anticipating that he wouldn't complete, and therefore it's asmachta loikan. Now this is where the money has actually been given into the hand of the vendor. Here, and as I say, I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I understand it's normally this money is put in the hands of a third party, by the escrow, whatever. And if it's completed, then it goes to the vendor, and if it's not completed, etc. So here, it's in a sense, the buyer who didn't buy is in a slightly better position, because he hasn't actually transferred the money. He's put it into the hands of a third party, and he hasn't surrendered the money. So as far as I understand, the minig amongst Hamish Yidden is that one would give back the down payment. Of course, there may be costs which should be deducted. There may be losses. There may be, because you put down the down payment and I lost another buyer, there can be consequential losses. And of course, that kind of compensation would absolutely be in order, that the vendor should be compensated for those consequential losses. But to keep that £100,000 because Nebuch, the buyer, wasn't able to come up with the full money in time. So as far as I understand, the be not to follow Dina de Malchusa, and that he should be able to ask for his deposit back. But as you see, it's not such a straightforward halacha.
Dayan, we actually discussed this some years ago, and we came up with a formula that there should be a penalty clause if the buyer does not complete on time. So it wasn't a ribis. It wasn't because, especially the penalty clause, wasn't 10% each week or something like that. It was an amount. No, it was an amount depending on the number of weeks, but it didn't relate at all to the rate of interest. So 1 week it would be 5%, next week might be 10%, next week would be 7%, something like that.
But it wouldn't grow.
The amount would go up, but it wasn't a fixed amount, and it wasn't related to either the rate of interest that the banks were charging or anything else. It was just
like a penalty of sorts.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, okay. Thank you. Right. Baruch Hashem, we have some qualified legal advice. Finally, we have our last thing for tonight's shiur, and that is, I got this call the other day. Two or more Yidden went out to an expensive restaurant, and they bought a bottle of wine, a very expensive wine. I can't believe it, a bottle of wine costing £1,000, but it looks like there's one of those. And the better wines are not mevushal. And the Goyish waiter helpfully takes the bottle and takes it to the side and uses a corkscrew and opens it up. And now, so they got this, they call up in Beha'aloscha in shock to their rabbi, who calls me, are they allowed to drink this wine in the restaurant once the Goy has already opened the bottle? So obviously we know that if a Goy touches wine, it's called yain nesech or stam yainom. We don't drink it. So let's read a couple of pieces in halacha. First one is from Siman Kuf Chof Hei. Notal goy kli shel yain. If a goy picks up a container of wine, and he raised it, and he poured the wine. Even though he didn't stir it, he didn't put his finger to stir the wine, or he didn't shake the bottle, whatever. The wine which he poured out is forbidden for us to drink, because it was his energy which released the wine, moved it from the bottle into the cup. For that matter, in what's left in the original bottle is also mishum nitzuk. Let's give a minute about nitzuk. Nitzuk means that the stream, you may know that electricity can travel upstream also. You can get a connection with water. If you're onto a wire, it can chas v'shalom cause electrocution. And in Hilchos Yain Nesech, there's a similar concern that the isur of the wine in the cup will go back up the stream into the bottle. Okay. Now, the second point which we have is from the Shach. And the Shach is in somewhere nearby. And he says, Ulidan hakoil shori b'mokim hefset. Although that's the overall principle, if a guy pours wine, it's osur. But if there's this loss, and certainly a significant loss, although I wonder how significant £1,000 is for people who go to spend £1,000 on a bottle of wine. But fine. But there is a hefset. The kol masha osur min hadin b'shesiyo. The didan be'akum is all right. Let's explain something. There's the isur of drinking and there's the isur hanoah. And the yain nesech in this mind of the Gemara was not only osur to drink, it was osur b'hanoah. Here, the Mechaber is saying that it's not osur b'hanoah, it's only osur b'shesiyo. Says the Shach, when there's a significant loss involved, when the verdict was that it's only osur b'shesiyo, we may take the view that akum bezman hazeh, that the goyim nowadays are not worshipping kechovim mazolis in the as they used to be, and therefore it's shori af b'shesiyo, the wine is permitted even to drink. So that was what I answered on the phone, that since here is a significant loss, so if it's a smaller amount, so then one would take the view that if a guy touches the wine and lifts it up, then it's asur. But if it's a significant loss, then it is asur, and then it is mutter, which perhaps I've told this story before, but you have another minute. We have a couple of people who haven't heard the story. I had this call a few years ago, and it was a shliach in California. It was about 8 o'clock in the morning, about 2 o'clock in California, or perhaps whatever, that kind of time. And it was 2 days before, a day before Rosh Hashanah, and the Goyish chef had been preparing for 50, 60 people at the Beis Chabad, and had put in trays of meat into the oven. But before doing so, he took a bottle of wine and poured the wine over all the chickens, all the portions of meat before putting in the oven. And for some unbeknown reason to me, the wine was not mevushal. So now, does that make all all that meat also? So, looking at what we've just said now, if he just poured the wine from the bottle, as we see from the Shach, it's quite a significant loss. One would be, it would be mutter. But then someone told me that the professional chefs, their minig is that when they pour wine, they put their finger to give it a bit of a biological taste. They put their finger and they scatter it with their finger. If that was the case, so then I don't see a heter for it, and it would be like also to have benefit to eat the meat. It'd be mutter b'hanoah, but it'd be also b'achila. Okay, that's it for today, and I wish you all a good Shabbos, a freilichen Tomid, and geula shlema krev.
Shabbos, Yashikoya.